Welcome, folks. Just give me a second. I'm going to add Mick to the layout here. I hope everyone is doing well. Hope you're doing well this time zone, this Saturday for me. It's morning at 11 a.m., where I currently exist in the world. It is not 11 a.m. for Shaka, though.
No, definitely not 11 a.m. for me. We are into the late of the afternoon at about 4 p.m. now.
Yeah. All right. Absolutely love your PNG, Mick.
It's
Oh,
great.
right, I forgot about that one.
It's great. It's I love it. It's great.
I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a cat.
All right. So let's do the introductions. I'll start. Hello, all. I am Tai. I like to say that I'm a PhD candidate by day and AeroAce activist, podcaster, and questionably competent streamer by night. I I started this podcast last year after being part of the Ace and Arrow raid train organized by Shania, and it really kind of gave me the opportunity to meet a bunch of other Aspec content creators and have this wealth of streamers with an Aspec, various different lived experiences under the Ace and Arrow umbrellas. And I realized at that time there wasn't really any space for us to have these sort of discussions. The other, of course, inspiration is the Ace and Arrow support group that I help run IRL. So those are kind of the main two inspirations for the podcast. And today we are joined by Shaka and Mick, who's joined us in the past. Mick, do you want to start off by introducing yourself?
Oh yeah, my name is Mick. My pronouns are Z, they. I am a musician, a potter, and a content creator. I'm also agender, aromantic, and asexual. And I think that's a pretty good intro.
Absolutely. The so-called triple A battery, so to speak.
Yeah.
Shaka, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello. Yes, I'm Shaka. I am of the kind of opinion of what is gender. I don't really know what's going on here with me. I kind of use just any pronouns because I'm like, you can perceive me as whatever you want to perceive me as because I don't know what gender is. Um, I am currently a computer game development student. I've gone back after doing veterinary nursing for 4 years. And I make content on Twitch, mostly currently playing a lot of Hollow Knight and trying to do things hitless and being very silly about it. And I would consider myself demisexual. I've only really realized that in the last couple of years. Though it's still quite a new thing to explore for myself.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people, kind of come into this understanding of aspec identity a little bit later into life because we are so hardwired and told by society that that's not a thing for a large part of our lives, unfortunately. Especially if you grew up in kind of the era that I did, where sex ed barely existed, and you were told that you had to be some sort of flavor of cis heterosexual, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, I grew up like thinking, oh, I'm definitely a lesbian. That's probably because I was able to make friends with women easier. So then I had that friendship going, and it was a thing that was built upon, and I never really knew or realized what demisexuality was. Um, so yeah, I think that was just kind of put in place by that. I was like, oh well, I like women better, so that's clearly what I am. But it's, I think, mostly because I was able to make friends with them and build up a relationship easier.
Absolutely. It can take a lot of time to really come to understand the subtleties of, Aspec identity and just how broad of an umbrella it is. Thank you so much again to both of you for joining today. I'm excited to continue our exploration of the intersections between gender, particularly demigender and agender, and aspec identity. So I want to kind of start with a couple of, brief, I would say, kind of dictionary type definitions to start the chat. And then I want to say that the dictionary box labels that we use aren't always necessarily truly reflective of our lived experiences. And so I will then ask for you to explain how you perceive or how you experience, demigender and agender in your own lived experience. But we'll start with demigender and then we'll remind folks about agender, which we talked about last earlier this week on the last episode. So demigender is an umbrella term where folks may feel a partial connection to a particular gender, but not fully connect with that gender. And often, but not always, they may partially identify with, say, a binary gender and partially identify with agender, but demigender can really come in any form of flavor. It's just that you partially connect with some sort of gender, but not fully connect with it. And then agender is basically a term to describe folks that are genderless or they lack gender. Some folks describe it as kind of their gender is a void, or they don't feel like they have a gender. I've heard it explained many different ways. I think one of my friends basically said that if they had to describe their gender, it's just an endless, bottomless pit of void, which I really like. But that's just one particular, one particular lived experience. So, Shaka, do you want to talk about, how you experience demigender?
Yeah, I mean, like, as I've said, like, I have kind of come to the realization in the last couple of years, I'm like, I don't really understand what gender is really, and I think a lot of that has to do with my autism as well. But like, I would slightly associate more towards like a demigirl kind of thing, being more feminine, and I think that's just from growing up. But a lot of the time I'm just like, I don't really know what's going on with my gender. I don't really feel that much of a connection to things at all. And sometimes I'd feel more of a connection to literally it just not existing for me, really.
It's a real mood. Absolutely. And I can totally kind of understand, that feeling where it's like, society perceives me this way. So I guess, maybe I can see, where I may exist within that realm, but as, a non-binary person myself, I really don't feel like that truly describes who I am. So I totally appreciate that for sure. Mick, do you want to talk about, what agender means in your lived
Yeah.
experience?
I guess I don't know, kind of like when I was growing up, everyone was kind of like, you're either, a boy or a girl, which we know is not to be true now, but I never really felt like I fit into either category. Like I always felt like I was kind of, outside of that norm, neither boy nor girl. And it kind of came to me as I talked to other people, like, you don't really have to choose. There's like a secret option where it's nothing. So, and that's kind of how agender. And I'm like, this kind of just drives me. Like, I don't really feel like any gender, like, at all.
That's a really good way of explaining it. Absolutely. I really like that way that you explained it as the secret option that nobody out there knows about. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's like that's not what we were taught growing up, that there was any other option. It's like you're either this or that. And it's like then you grow up and you're like, oh, there's a secret.
Yeah, unfortunately, I never came across anybody that identified even, using a non-binary label growing up, it just didn't seem to be a thing in high school. And it really wasn't until later in the university days that I started to meet folks that identified, at least outwardly, and were comfortable identifying publicly as non-binary or agender. So I never really had the exposure that there was this secret option until much later in life. I was like, society deems me as X. I guess I have to be X and I'll perform it as X. And then later in life, I was like, but wait a minute, I'm not.
No, exactly. You didn't think there was any other option growing up, so it was like, well, I'll just deal with what it is.
Yeah. So true. So, I mentioned this last episode, and I'll kind of mention it again here. And this very much was the case for me. I often hear folks in the Aspec community, joke about first coming to understand their Aspec identity. And then afterwards, the floodgates open, and then they're like, well, what actually is gender? And that's very much what happened for me. I came to understand my Aspec identity. I started critically questioning societal assumptions in general. And then I was like, why do I have to try to conform to this box that society's dictated I must because a doctor told me that's what I was when I was born? And then I was like, but actually, no, I'm not. And I know for many folks, kind of in my vintage of age, that's what kind of happened for them. Did you feel like you came to understand your gender first, or did you kind of come to your understanding of your Aspec identity and then came to question your gender? I don't know who wants to go first here.
I mean, if for me, I like as a teenager, I kind of came to a realization about my sexuality that I thought I was a lesbian, and then kind of getting older and like meeting non-binary people and things like that, I was like, oh, maybe this is me. And I was like, oh, but then the textbook definition of lesbianism, I was like, oh, well, I can't be that, so I don't really know what's going on. And it was just like a whole mess of confusion about both of them, really. And yeah, I'd say it's probably been the last, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years that it's all, everything's kind of come together, that I was like, oh, well, I can, have more of a preference towards certain things, but there is this other umbrella of like demisexuality being under the Aspec umbrella and things like that, and then it all kind of just tied together at once. I think for me, it was a lot of things going on for a couple of years, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that one of my friends mentioned for them that they very much feel that their agender identity is inherently linked to their aspec identity because they see societal gender roles as being very much linked to how you are supposed to perform in, let's face it, what society tells you will be a cis heterosexual relationship. And if you don't see yourself as fitting in those boxes, then why do you have to conform to these societal gender roles? And so for them, they very much see their agender identity as being linked. We'll get into this in a minute here, but did you want to add anything to that, Mick?
Um, well, I guess for me, like, so I discovered that I was ace pretty early on in life. And I guess I've always kind of felt agender, but like I really didn't have a word for it until I started hanging out with like openly like non-gender conforming people. And then after that I discovered aromanticism. So it was kind of like asexual, then agender, and then aromantic.
Definitely. So kind of building on this, I want to reference a paper written by ace researcher Canton Weiner, and it's a essay that Canton Weiner wrote called "My Gender is Like an Empty Lot," and in it, Canton discusses gender detachment and talks about finding respondents kind of conforming to one of three groups with regards to gender detachment. So in one group, Canton Weiner describes folks with complete detachment, i.e., they see no connection between their gender identity and their aspec identity. So he goes on to quote, one respondent in this group noted, "My gender's like an empty lot. There may have been a building there at some point, but it has long since fallen away, and there's no need to rebuild it. The space is better for being left empty." So for that person, their gender identity and their aspec identity are not at all related, and they very much, I think, describe their gender just being very much, as my friend said, a void. It's no longer exists essentially. And then we have this second group that are kind of like, I don't know. They find, they call it ambivalent detachment. And in this group, respondents find that gender is mostly unimportant for them. One respondent is quoted as saying, "I guess I'm a she because nothing else fits or feels right, but it's very much a loose concept. I think more than anything, my gender is something aesthetic. I'm loosely attached to it as a concept, but I do construct it in a certain way that most people generally interpret at least being feminine leaning, and I'm okay with that." And then we have this third group of respondents where they very much feel that their aspec identities and their genders are, their gender or lack thereof is very much linked. Often related to around the societal assumptions around gender roles, particularly in regards to sex and sexuality. And one respondent stated, "If you were to take away the parts of gender that are related to sex and sexuality, I'd say, yeah, I'm a woman. But there's a lot more to gender that really just doesn't feel relevant to me. And in those ways, I'm not. I haven't really settled on a specific gender label for myself, and I honestly don't know if I will, but at least not anytime soon." I found this discussion really interesting because it really highlights just how diverse, the non-binary and agender perspectives can be. There's this one group, they're just like, gender is an empty void. It's not at all related to sex or sexuality. And you've got this other group that really sees it as being inextricably linked to societal roles around, how you're supposed to conform in the binary gender. And I think we've kind of already talked about this a bit. What group would you see yourself kind of falling with if you had to pick one of these three groups? You want to start with Mick?
Yeah, we can start with me. I think that I would be in group one. I mean, I guess they both kind of happened when I was younger, but I don't think that they were linked in any way, shape, or form.
That's so completely valid. And I really like that, the respondent quoted, "My gender's like an empty lot." I really just like that
Hmm.
quotation. It's great.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it very much describes agender perfectly. Shaka, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was more groups, I'd nearly fall between the first and the second. It's like
So
sometimes I
valid.
kind of feel like it's, that there is nothing there, and then sometimes I'm like, oh well, maybe, but I don't really know. So, if it was a bit more extended, I'm someone who likes a lot of groups and for things to be divided into categories if they can be, but I know that that's not
Mhm.
always the way that things can be. Again, I think that's very related to my autism.
Yeah,
So I'm like, it's like if there's a little in-betweeny bit, I could be there.
that is so valid. And I mean, this is just one particular perspective. And,
Hmm.
humans love to try to categorize things into boxes. And
Yep.
our experiences don't readily fit into a
No.
box. We are not rigid boxes. Our lived experiences are much more, they have a lot of subtleties and intangible differences that aren't accounted for by rigid boxes, that don't account for, intersectionality or a whole
Hmm.
host of other things that these rigid boxes just seem to ignore. They're like, well, you're this because X.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's like the thing with like a lot of cisgender people, like they just go with what the norm is, but like even if I think everyone should at some point maybe question their gender, even if it comes out to the point that like, yes, I am what society has told me I am.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
fine.
That is so valid. Such a good point. And I know I've talked about it, from an Aspec perspective, that because of the way that, we experience, you know, sex or romantic attraction, we've had to critically think about these societal norms around romance and sex much more so than, um, the typical group of society would. And so I think we have, much more of a nuanced appreciation for just how, we really can pick apart these societal norms around sex, sexuality, and romance.
Hmm.
And I think that's also why many folks in the Aspec community feel a draw to something like, and I'm not saying all Aspec folks do at all, that's not what I'm saying, but there seems to be a particular subset of folks within the Aspec community that definitely feel like they can relate to many aspects of something like, oh man, what is it called? My brain is like half asleep today. Um, Relationship anarchy. That's the word I was
Hmm.
looking for.
Yeah.
and we've talked about it before. I'll link link in the chat. Basically, it's a term that was coined by Andy Nordgren way back in 2009, and it's an anti-hierarchical relationship philosophy which actively rejects societal assumptions and norms around relationships. I myself very much can see many aspects that I can relate to around it. You know, basically the idea that I don't hierarchically put any one particular relationship over another relationship. I see, you know, my relationships as unique, and they all serve their own purpose. And I don't find that any one particular person in my life is going to fulfill all the emotional requirements that I have in my life.
Yeah.
And I think because we have such different, you know, relationship to sex and romance, we're forced to think about this much more critically than the average person does. So
Yeah, for sure.
I love what this for Demise said. Relationship anarchy, much less exciting than people hope for. Things with the word anarchy to be. That is great.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not anything, you know, really, you know, anarchical, but it very much questions the societal norms and throws them out with regards to
Yeah.
relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, like, growing up, I think people are kind of taught, like, you'll get in a relationship, you'll get married, you'll have kids. This is what you'll do.
Right.
This person will be everything for you, and it's like you shouldn't expect one person to be everything for you. Like, you should have friends that support you in needs. Maybe
Yeah.
you'll only have one romantic or sexual relationship, and that's fine, but they shouldn't be everything for you. Like, you need support in other ways, and you need to not be putting all of that on one person. It's not fair.
Exactly. And I'll link another link here if you want to learn more about relationship anarchy and kind of its intersection with, you know, things like QPRs, polyamory, and just overall just a really good overview of what it actually is. Because I find that the article that I linked there can be a little bit hard to wrap your head around at first. But I think this video really does a good job at kind of talking about what exactly is relationship anarchy and how, you know, can I, if I'm interested, incorporate aspects of it into my own life. And I very much have done so, you know, in my life when it comes to relationships, really critically thinking about how do I see relationships and how do I value the different relationships and their purpose in my life. And I've really tried to take that on, you know, even if I don't practice every single aspect of relationship anarchy as a whole. I think that anybody can learn something from relationship anarchy and apply it to any sort of relationship that they're in, even
Yeah,
if they
for
don't
sure.
adhere to the 9 tenets of relationship anarchy that are talked about there. Really, it basically comes down to we should communicate and we should question societal norms as just, you know, being something we have to adhere to. That's really what it is. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And why should we just accept things because that's what we were told from the time we were a little tiny toddler?
Yeah.
So I know you alluded to this, Shaka. There is a huge overlap between the neurodivergent communities, um, you know, the communities for of folks that fall outside the gender binary, as well as, you know, many folks in the Aspec community. And I want to acknowledge that these are distinct identities and concepts. There just is a large overlap between them.
Mhm.
And I think for some folks, they do feel that these identities are linked for them. I'm not saying that's the
Mhm.
case for everyone, and I want to acknowledge they are not the same thing. But with regards to gender, for example, there is a label, Auti gender, for example, which is
Mhm.
exclusively reserved for those who do feel that there's a connection between autism and their gender identity. And I remember that you mentioned you do see a connection between your neurodivergence and the way that you perceive gender or the lack thereof. Are you able to elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I have heard the term of gender before. It's not something I personally use for myself, even though I do see that bit of connection. I think it's mostly like a lot of people that are autistic, not everyone obviously, but a lot of people, they find it very hard to conform to societal norms anyway and know the reasons for things, and it's like they want to understand why things are the way they are, and a lot of the time there isn't actually an explanation. It just is the way it is, and it's like, but why? I want to know why all the time, and no one can answer me. I'm like, but that's the way you're doing things seems completely illogical. And they're like, well, that's just the way we've done it forever. And I think that that's very similar in gender. It's like we were growing up taught. I have a very loud cat. We were like taught growing up that, you know, you're a boy or you're a girl, and I'm like, but I don't feel like really either of them. So like, why isn't there something else? And I just never really understood any of the societal norms that were attached to either of them. So I think the reason of me not understanding these things is linked in intrinsically with my autism rather than anything else. Would you like to come and say hello?
Very much wants to share in this
She wants.
discussion.
She would like to be involved. You're a problem. I apologize for my problematic child.
No, we enjoy kitties on this channel.
She is problem gender. Yes. Yes, she is. She identifies as a problem. Yes.
That
she
is
does.
such a mood. And welcome on
Yeah.
in, Warrior for Life 9761. Meowdy indeed.
I don't know how to help you.
I love the leopard spot pattern on her.
Yes, she is. This is now the Tuna Show. Apparently, she's a Bengal. She's a purebred cat, and she likes to make everyone aware that she exists. Yes, you're very loud.
As Mick said, they are Arrow Ace agender, and they want to make it everyone's problem. So
Mhm.
relatable.
Yes, this is Tuna, and she wants to make every single problem that she has everyone else's problem, even if it means that her problem is I want to go outside at 3 a.m. So
Oh no.
yeah. Oh dear. I've kept the people away from interrupting me, not the cat.
That's valid. Completely.
She is difficult to ignore, so.
And I very much relate to, questioning things, from a neurodivergent perspective. It's like, but why?
Yeah.
Why? Can you find some evidence to logically argue why I must conform? It's like, well, you just
Exactly.
have to.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not satisfactory. That's not what
Yeah.
I'm looking for. So I can very much see, that linking to how I perceive, my own gender identity. Like, well, you haven't satisfactorily argued to me why I must be X or must be Y.
Mm-hmm.
So why should I?
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect way to sum it up. It's like, but just why? Like, why are things the way they are? And no one can really give you an answer other than it's just the way it's always been. It's like, but we can change that.
Don't get me started on that with regards to how things are done in academia, especially in
Oh,
grad school. It's like, well, I had to do this, and so you must suffer through it too. It's like, but why should I have to if there are really much better ways we could be doing it? Just
yeah.
because you're
I mean,
salty doesn't mean that you should force others to do it.
I've seen that a lot in the conversations that were going around maybe a couple of years ago now about the debt relief for college students in America. It's like, well, I had to pay it, so you should too. It's like, okay, it could be better though.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Just because it was done that way when you were growing up doesn't mean that it's inherently the best way that it could be done.
Yeah.
Things evolve. It does things don't have to stay static, and they shouldn't.
No.
If there are better ways to do things, I think, we should very much incorporate that into how we, you know, exist as a society, how we exist in our own daily lives. Yeah, Panda is a cat, a very
Amazing.
affectionate, silly little creature.
Perfect. I do love my cats.
I miss my cat. We rescued a cat from a state park in Oregon in 2001. Brought him across the border, and the border guard asked, why are you bringing a cat all the way from Oregon? Aren't there cats in Canada you could have rescued? And we're like, yeah, but we want this one.
I want this one.
It wasn't a problem. They let, we had all the vaccination requirements and everything, but it was more just a question, but why?
Yes.
To
But you
build
had
on
an
that.
answer to that, but why? It's
Yeah,
I want this
exactly.
one.
That is a mood, Warrior for Life 9761. How about you, Mick? Any thoughts around this particular idea or concept?
Um, not particularly, because I'm also, autistic, so but I've never really put thought into them being intertwined. But I guess
Yeah.
it could make sense since I guess asexuality and aromanticism go against the norm.
And they are different concepts.
Right.
Absolutely. There just seems to be a large overlap between the communities for sure, but they aren't inherently linked. It seems to be that there's an overlap, so completely valid. We've gone through the questions rather quickly here that I've prepared, at least. We're only 45 minutes in, and we're only coming to the last question here that I had prepared. So if you have other things that you want to talk about, absolutely. If folks in the chat have any kind of thoughts, feel free to share them. So the last question that I had, prepared here was around, agender, and I guess you could build on, though. I mean, demigender, I think, does, encompass some aspects, a little bit more so than agender. Do you see them as being part of the non-binary umbrella, or are they separate? I would say.
I mean,
Any-
I think it's a hard thing
Yeah.
to quantify. Like, I know people have kind of thought of non-binary as its own thing in some
Mhm.
cases and an umbrella term in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like, instead of creating more categories and things, they've gone, well, if you're not either a man or a woman, and you're not, if you're a trans man or you're a trans woman, you still fall into that binary of things. So everything else will just lump into non-binary. I think that's what's generally happened, but I don't know
Mhm.
if that's the way it should be or should stay. Um, yeah, it's a
Absolutely.
good thing to have a think about, really.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring this up, because I think it's something we should think about. Because you're right, non-binary is both a label unto itself and also the default umbrella to describe anything that's not binary.
Yeah.
And that definitely adds to the ambiguity of what we mean when we're talking about non-binary. And I think with particular, agender being a distinct lack of, non-binary still implies a gender. So that's where I really want to philosophically dissect this a bit. Is agender non-binary, or is it a distinct category unto itself? What do you think, Mick?
Um, I think it's probably something that varies from person to
Mm-hmm.
person. Cause like for me, like I see it as it falls outside of the binary.
Mm-hmm.
So like that inherently makes it non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people that don't like being called non-binary, and like I
Mm-hmm.
get that. And I feel like labels are descriptive, like, and you don't actually have to put yourself in a box.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like labels are more for us than
Yep.
like
Yeah, for
you
sure.
can't really have people, because like if I say I'm agender but I'm not, like I don't want to be classified as non-binary, like no one else can be like, oh, but you are non-binary,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
that's what I've set for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, because there's like, I guess the similar thing with like asexuality and like aromanticism, where people are like, this falls under this umbrella, and then there are people that are like, I don't feel like that fits me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like you can't really push your perception of what is or isn't
No,
on to another person.
nor should you. The only person that should be, you know, labeling or not labeling themselves is that particular person. Nobody can tell you what you are unless, because you know your lived experience best. I still wanted to have this discussion because I think it's an important one to bring up, because it has been a
Mm-hmm.
kind of an interesting point of contention within the community. I know that some agender folks, for example, when they're just you know outside in general society, will say they're non-binary because it's easier for somebody who doesn't know the intricacies of what agender means to potentially understand. But within aspec or non-binary communities who may have a better understanding of the subtleties, they'll say they're agender, for example.
Yeah, I've experienced that a lot with people. It's like people in like kind of the general collective are familiar enough now with the word non-binary, so no
Mm-hmm.
matter what other label you're prescribing to yourself, you might say, oh well, I'm non-binary, just to not have this big long deep discussion about what all's going on with yourself and what your gender identity is. But you might not feel that that's actually fully right for you. But it's the word that most people will generally understand, if they don't have much of a an interest in any of these things, or they've never looked into any of these kind of things. And like Mick was saying about labels, like labels are meant to help us, they're not meant to hinder us. So there's no point in like getting deep down into things if you don't want to, or if you feel like those labels do put you into a box that you don't want to be in, or you have people being like, well, if you're using that label, this is what you are. And it's like, I'm using it in my own way, and I think that's fine, really.
And I very much use, the umbrella, ace spec for myself, because I don't know if any one of the particular micro labels perfectly fits how I, my lived experience. I just know I fall somewhere under the umbrella. I just don't care enough, or have a micro label that perfectly describes my experience. And in reality, they're a box, and they will never be able to perfectly describe your experience. So
Yeah,
I
like
totally understand
no,
that.
no one label is going to be able to perfectly describe something, and if people want to put like 10 different labels on themselves to be able to describe something, that's fine. Or if someone's like, well, this kind of suits me, so I'll go with this one, but it doesn't fully suit me, that's also fine. Like, you don't have to go into every single label that you are if you don't want to.
Exactly. I feel that, aromantic very much describes me, but I'm kind of like on the, with regards to asexuality, somewhere under the umbrella, that's good enough for me.
Yeah. But yeah, with regards to agender, I personally feel it probably is its own separate thing, but like Mick said, it isn't part of a binary, so I guess it could fall under non-binary, but it's the fact that we use non-binary as its own label and we use it as an umbrella that it kind of makes things a bit more confusing. If we only used it as an umbrella and had these other definitions underneath it, maybe then you could say, yes, absolutely it is non-binary, but it's when people are using non-binary as its own label as well, then I think that's where the waters get muddied a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I use it, think I'm using it as a umbrella term, because I haven't really figured out where under the umbrella I happen to fall. I've kind of been, there's aspects of gender queer that I vibe with, but I don't know if that's the right one for me either.
Yeah.
And I've seen, though, that non-binary, especially in the early days, gender queer and non-binary in terms of the actual label were almost used interchangeably. But I've also seen them used in a different way, and that's the part that gets so confusing sometimes. And then you use it as an umbrella term, and it just makes things even more messy.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, definitions, like, they evolve over time, and like our understanding of things, even if the correct definition that's in a dictionary hasn't changed, the like general population's understanding of it has changed.
Yeah.
So it's just like people are like, well, this is what it exactly means. It's like, well, that's not what it means for me. And I think that's okay.
Exactly. And that's why I prefaced our initial discussion. This is what the dictionary definition says, but it doesn't exactly describe your lived experience and how you interact with that label. Because it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we are all individuals, even if we all use similar or the same labels, that doesn't mean we're going to be using them in the exact same way.
Exactly. We do have an ad break coming up in 2 minutes 47 seconds from now. So I figure we can kind of finish off our thoughts on this, take a little short break, and then maybe come back. And if you have any other thoughts, other things you'd like to add, we can go into those topics. And if you're, for folks in the chat, if you have any thoughts that you want to add on this discussion, feel free to pop them in as well, and we can give those a think while we're on the ad break.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we jump over and take a little BRB?
Perfect. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We'll be back in about 5 or so minutes. See you on the other side. Welcome back, folks. Thanks for sticking around through the ads. We had a really good question come in the chat, which is a really interesting kind of parallel. Dis for Demise. Demise said, "Thought on the subject of is a gender a type of non-binary? See a lot of parallels to is pan a type of bisexual?" And I've seen many discussions around this, and during the break I was also talking about the fact that within the support group circle I've seen our organization, for example, use the term bi plus to encompass a spectrum of identities which describe sexual attraction to two or more genders. And I've seen also the term M-spec used. And it's always, I was talking about the fact that it's always tricky when you're creating support groups as to how limited or how broad do you want to make them. And it's a very good question because, some folks who are bisexual or there are, don't feel that that label, an M-spec or bi plus label is the right one for them. And as we said, nobody should tell you what your label is. You should be the one to decide that. But it definitely brings up the, an interesting philosophical question is, how do you go about categorizing these lived experiences when none of them are really going to describe anybody's lived experience perfectly? And it's always been a big part of this podcast is to talk about the intersecting identities within within these experiences, and talking about the fact that we cannot talk about aspec identity without accounting for intersectionality, because that's very much going to influence your lived experience and how you experience your asexuality, your aromanticism, for example. So, that question's a really interesting one. Any thoughts, Shaka or McTastic, on the question in the chat there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of overlap here between like people choosing to identify whether as pan or bi or anything like that, and I think it does kind of face the same kind of problems. Like people are like, well, this is the definition of that, so if you're this, then you're also this. It falls under the same umbrella, so you must be this. But I think it runs into the same kind of thing with the fact that I was saying about like labels are meant to help you rather than fall into some form of definition. I've also seen it a lot with, people who aren't quite as inclusive or understanding of things, where they've seen a cis heteronormative person being with a trans person, and they're like, oh, well, you must be bisexual. And it's like, well, no, because they are the gender they say they are. So if you're a man in a relationship with a trans woman and you say you're straight, you are straight. Like, that's... You're not bi just because you're saying they were once something else,
Right.
And I think it's kind of playing into the same thing. It's just like, it's about the labels helping us, and people shouldn't go around telling you what you are just because, oh, well, this is the definition of that, and that, like, oh, well, pan's the same thing as bisexual, so you should just be bisexual. It's not. And I think it's kind of the same thing with the agender and non-binary. Like, I would put myself under the umbrella of non-binary, but, I don't see them as the exact same thing.
Very good point. Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely It's definitely a really good question, and something that, as somebody who runs, a support group for the Aspec community, I've always thought about the fact that, you know, we try to be as inclusive as we can in these support groups, but I noticed that within our support group, the overwhelming majority of folks in the group are either aro ace or um, uh, you know asexual folks who experience romantic attraction. I've only ever seen one allo aro person, and they felt very uncomfortable because of the fact that almost everybody there was ace. And
Yeah.
so it creates a lot of issues in, we try to be as accommodating as possible. The other issue is that unfortunately 99% of the folks in the group are very much like me, white. And if you're not
Yeah.
white, it's not going to be the most comfortable group necessarily. And it's something that as an organization we've struggled with. And that's why I really try to highlight the importance of intersectionality when we have these discussions.
For sure, yeah. It is, it is hard in that way because it's like you want to be inclusive, but if you're not someone that has, relations with people of other races and things like that, it's hard coming from your own perspective of, yes, I know I am white and I have a lot of privilege in that and I want to include other people, but if I can't find those other people to be part of the organizing and things like that, it's not going to be as easy to be as intersectional as we want to be.
Exactly. It is always a really big challenge. And, as an organization, we do have a group. It's like an all encompassing, here's a group for, folks who are Black, who are Indigenous and racialized. But it's like an all encompassing, all the, BIR folks can come to this group. But there's a lot of intersection within, BIR communities. There's a lot of different lived experiences within those groups, and it always is such a big struggle for, organizations to create support groups. And as you get more and more narrow with those lived experiences, it definitely creates struggles for sure. Acknowledging you want to be as inclusive as you can, but also acknowledging the fact that my lived experience is that of a white settler. I'll never be able to understand, or, I can appreciate the struggles, but I'll never be able to have that intimate knowledge and understanding that comes with being Black, Indigenous, or racialized. And I acknowledge that it does create struggles. So I definitely see, and I don't know what the answer is for, our organization, for example. It's not an easy one to answer. And I think it really comes down to dismantling the structures, the organizational structures that we as colonized society have. But that in itself is not something that we as a singular organization are going to resolve on our own.
No. No, for sure.
And I know I've talked a lot about in this podcast the fact that most of the media representation of Aspec identity is white and very narrow in its definition. I spoke with Mick earlier this summer just how hard it is to find Aspec, Black Aspec characters in media, for example.
Right.
Might know one. That's about it. And it's hard to come to understand your identity if there's nobody that looks like you in media, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the case with a lot of representation. It takes a long time to get the representation, and when it starts, it's almost always white people.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this Instagram reel that was an interview with ER Fightmaster, I think their name is. They were on Grey's Anatomy, and at the time said I think they were one of only 2 non-binary characters on network television. And as far as I'm aware, I know they are white, and I assume the other person was also white because that is the assumption to be made, because that's just the way things go at the start. Like if there's only 2, it's not going to include racialized people or black people or indigenous people because they don't have great representation in any way already. Like even just getting on TV as, even a cis heteronormative person, there's not enough representation of them anyway.
Unfortunately not. And as you add layers and layers and layers of intersectionality, it becomes more and more difficult for sure. Even though it's really important to have those discussions and have that sort of representation, it just gets harder and harder, unfortunately. Which is why I've always been a proponent of dismantle the colonial patriarchy. But I alone cannot do it myself, unfortunately.
No. Oh, if one person could do it, it would have already been done.
Yeah. Yup. As Warrior for Life said, Warrior for Life 9761 said, it's just hard getting representation in anything as a whole.
Yeah.
As a marginalized person of any, of any intersection, getting any sort of representation is near impossible, unfortunately.
It really sucks.
Yeah, for sure. Like growing up in the 90s, it was the only representation of anything other than the norm was, you would maybe have a gay man, and he was always the butt of the joke.
Mm-hmm.
It was never good representation.
No.
It's the same as when you see, like, growing up, the representation that disabled people had were as villains for the most part. It's like, a villain would have a disfigurement or they'd have some sort of disability, and that's what we got growing up. And it's like, that's, it's how people see, like, people with scars or things like that, like, visible scars on their face. It's like, oh, well, children are taught that they're scary because they were seen growing up as the villains of things. That's, yeah, any representation on anything, it's just very hard to get.
And, Warrior for Life 9761 mentioned getting accurate deaf representation is absolutely terrible as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. And just acknowledging our inherent bias as a society in assuming everybody can communicate and hear the way that able-bodied hearing folks can is very much an injustice. Everything's verbal communication, and there's very little support for deaf folks anywhere. Go to school, it's all verbal lectures. Go to restaurants, it's all verbal communication, and there is almost nowhere, except for a few organizations here and there that include ASL, for example. Like one of the Toronto Aces and Arrows groups tries to include ASL interpretation when they can, but as a small, tiny organization, it's not always easy to afford, because they want to be able to pay for that sort of stuff, but it doesn't come cheaply, and if you don't make much money to begin with, it definitely creates an inequity on many levels.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's as well, like, a lot of disabilities, they are seen in a very very linear way of like, well, if you're deaf, you can't hear anything.
No.
And if you're
Right.
not deaf, you can hear everything. And that's
No.
just not the way it is.
No.
And that's
It's a
the way it's
spectrum.
portrayed whenever we like portray disabilities. We portray it as one thing or another. And it has to be this absolute thing. It's like I've seen many deaf creators who are speaking completely normally, and people are like, oh, well, you can't be deaf because you don't speak the way I assume a deaf person speaks. There's a YouTuber that I follow, her name's Jessica Calgren Fozard, and she is deaf, but growing up she wasn't fully deaf, and she grew up and she learned how to speak, and she speaks in very like pronounced RP, very English, proper English sounding. People are like, well, I don't understand how you're deaf, you don't speak like a deaf person. It's like, well, not everyone's the same, you know? I've heard many deaf people speak quote unquote normally, and I've heard many deaf people speak in a different way. It's because it's fully a spectrum, just as many things are.
And Warrior for Life 9761 is late deaf themselves, and I know them quite well, and very much you would never know if they didn't, tell you they were deaf, that they were. Yeah. There's no, they don't speak in the way that society expects somebody who's deaf to speak, and
yeah,
it's a spectrum as well. So
yeah,
not everybody who's deaf has 0% hearing. I think technically, my grandmother would be considered deaf, or hard of hearing at least, and it's a spectrum, and so it's. But everything has to be binary in the eyes of society.
Yeah.
Either A or B, and no acknowledgement of the fact that that's wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Society is just obsessed with putting things into binary boxes.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
When in reality, everything is a continuous spectrum with nuances, but nuance is scary for society. They want everything to be neat and organized into convenient parcels that can be used by the patriarchal folks in power to keep themselves in power, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with things like autism, they're like, well, you don't look like my autistic cousin, so you can't be autistic. And whenever you tell them that it's a spectrum, they see it as a line, which is not what a spectrum is. And they don't understand that either. And it's like you're trying to explain it in a way, and then they don't even understand the words you're using in the explanation, because they're like, oh, well, okay, so you're less autistic. It's like, no, you're just autistic, but you have different needs for different things. Everything in the world is a spectrum, just like Warrior for Life has said.
Yeah. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. The way that they experience autism is not going to be the same as the next person. I would say that I'm very much high masking, and I've had to adapt that way in society because I was forced from the time I was young and told by my parents, you're not going to function in society if you don't conform to these neurotypical ways of living. And I'm just like, so.
Oh yeah, that hits hard.
And I struggled for many years to be able to understand social cues. And I think over time I've been able to, and things like looking, I very much had the stereotypical AMAB autism, stereotypical presentation, inability to make eye contact, difficulties making friends. And over time, I've sort of robotically come to find ways to adapt. Because of that, I very much present, or at least mask now, and pretend that I am able to do these things. But in reality, it's like a robotic decision if then else, how much eye contact do I have to make so the next person
Yeah.
beside me doesn't find it uncomfortable. But I'm very much
Yeah, for
inside,
sure.
like screaming, like ah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have more of the experience that Warrior for Life saying. I know I was, growing up AFAB, a lot of people don't notice these things because they think you're just a shy little
Hmm.
introverted girl. And I didn't get diagnosed till I was 26. And then getting that diagnosis and looking back on life, there are like specific moments that I'm like, how did nobody realize there was something going on? Even if you didn't know what autism was or how it presented or anything like that, how did my parents not pick up on something that was there?
Society, just in general, seems to be biased against anything that's not cis hetero male in power, fortunately.
Hmm. Yeah.
Should add able bodied as well.
Yeah.
Society is an absolute prick.
Yep. Absolutely.
Talked a lot about different aspects of neurodiversity and and disability, and got into a lot of really important discussions around intersections for sure. It's coming up to 1.5 hours at this point. I don't have anything else that I have prepared. Is there anything else that either of you wanted to add today?
I think we've mainly talked about all the things that I kind of wanted to get talking about.
Yeah.
Don't know about you, Mick.
Oh, no, I don't have anything else to say.
Very valid. My brain is sort of half empty this morning.
That's very
I
fair.
ended up staying, at least by my standards, up late, and by my standards, 10:30 p.m. folks is late for me, because I adhere to the octogenarian sleep schedule where I go to bed at 9 and wake up at 5:30. Usually, this morning I was able to sleep in until 6:15, and that very much is sleeping in for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I also did have a sleep in, but my sleep in was till about 10:30. But I wasn't home in my house until about 1:30 in the morning. So I
Oh,
think it's okay that I had an extra bit of
so
sleep.
valid. My problem is even if I like go to bed that late, my body will still like wake me up at 6:30 and I'll just be a
Yeah,
zombie.
yeah. I mean, I did wake up at 7, and then I was like, yeah, no, this is not the time to be getting up right now. I had a headache, and I was like, the socialness of last night. While I had a lot of fun, my brain is just too tired.
That is so relatable. So, I think at this point I'd like to finish by um asking where we can find you on the socials.
On the socials, you can find me. I think all of my handles are Shaka6331. Um, a lot of people wonder where the Shaka comes from, and they enter my chat and give me a Star Trek quote. And for a long time, I didn't know anything about that. Um, but it was a misspelling of my actual name by a friend, and it's just kind of stuck. So, yeah, we're Shaka6331 everywhere. The numbers came from back when Discord had little numbers attached to everything,
Mm-hmm.
and I just held on to them.
Completely valid. Yeah. And what socials can we find you on?
I am on Twitch. I'm streaming quite often, and I will be for the next little while because I now have 2 weeks off work and don't start back in uni for another 2 weeks. And I'm also doing Let's Plays over on YouTube now, which is a new venture I've started. I am on Blue Sky. I don't post very much over there, um, but those are the main ones.
Awesome. And Mick, where can we find you on the socials?
Um, Well, I'm McTastic on Twitch and on Blue Sky, but I am Baron _ Bond _ Milk on Twitter. Yeah, I think that's about all of my spaces.
I've sort of tried to be on all the socials, but it gets really tiring. And who really
It's a
wants
lot.
to be on Twitter these days in the absolute cess pool that it is?
Yeah.
It's just there's some people that haven't moved over to the other platforms, and so I'm kind of forced to continue to use it at this point.
Yeah. I know someone that I moderate for, like she's an ambassador here on Twitch, and the only reason she's really stuck on Twitter is because a lot of brands haven't moved
Mm-hmm.
over to Blue Sky,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the way she needs to keep in contact with them. It's like, I
Exactly.
don't want to be here, but
Yeah.
I have to for my job.
Yeah, that's very much where I'm at with Twitter at this point. I don't want to be here. My account is locked. You have
Right.
to, you basically have to be vetted to follow me.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that makes it so that I can't grow on Twitter, but it's kind of a space where if you are already following me in the past, you can still find me kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Threads, though I barely post on those. And then my most active is Blue Sky by far. IEY pretty much everywhere, though my spelling for Twitter is a little bit different because I used to spell Tieywy Tieywywhiey, and nobody knew how to pronounce that, so I tried to change it to the current spelling, and people still don't know how to pronounce my name. So I still at some point want to make a trailer video, and I somehow want to capture all the different ways that people try to pronounce my name as like the intro to my trailer, because I have
Yes, I
had
think
some
that's a great
absolutely
idea.
wild pronunciations of it.
Yeah.
Everything
No,
from Tiwi to Tayway.
you know, a friend of mine has done that in his in some of his clips that he plays during breaks and things like that. One of them is just a compilation of people saying his name in the most wild and wacky ways, or just typing it in weird ways, and like it's not even that hard of a name. It's quite phonetic.
Yeah, I tried to make it phonetic.
Hmm.
It's such a bizarre combination of letters. I think it throws people off. But when you actually
Yeah.
look at it, it's very much phonetic. It's like Ty, E, Y, E.
Yeah, for
The,
sure. I think the first time you were in my chat, I was like, I think I know, but I'm gonna try something. And then as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
yeah, absolutely. So at this point, I think we'll go on a raid. It will be the usual Aspec podcast raid.